So, this is not just the 200th anniversary of Arthur O'Neill, it's the 100th anniversary of Charlotte Milligan Fox. And I just couldn't let this go past. I couldn't let her sort of sail there underneath Arthur O'Neill, because it's his 200th anniversary, not say anything about her. Because were it not for Charlotte Milligan Fox, we really wouldn't have very much at all. So Bunting, of course, and his work is incredibly important. But had it not survived, what use would it be to us now? And it's thanks to this woman that his work survives and that we can consult it. So I thought it only right and proper that we celebrate Charlotte in her 100th anniversary. So the poet Arthur Percival Graves took a leading part in the late 19th century renewal of Irish literature, and he was for several years president of the Irish Literary Society. And here's what he wrote about Charlotte Milligan Fox. Let's have a look at her. How we do it. She was so indefatigable in the pursuit of what, as her sister writes, became such a passion to her, that she spared nothing for it. Time, money, health, and life itself. She traversed the north and south of Ireland with pencil and music paper, and then with her phonograph, taking down Irish airs and Irish words, colloguing in her delightfully natural way with high and low, farmer and beggar woman, piper, harper, fiddler, and ballad singer. And in the Journal of the Irish Folk Song Society, Dr. Donald O'Sullivan remarked of Charlotte Milligan Fox that she was highly educated in a musical sense. Mrs. Fox was a woman of unbounded energy, so everybody's talking about this energy she had, with a genuine enthusiasm for Irish melody. But her talent lay not so much in the notation of tunes as in encouraging collectors and discovering collections. Now, her cultural interests and achievements were rooted in factors that were already becoming apparent when she was a teenager in the 1880s. So the 1880s is a melting pot of cultural and political energy in Ireland. There's a renaissance in this period in Irish nationalism, and there's a renewed drive to reinvigorate Irish culture, and that finally leads, of course, to political undertakings at the turn of the 20th century. This finally leads to the rising in 1916 and eventually to the Civil War and Irish independence in 1922. So she's a teenager when all this is fomenting under the surface and when it bubbles to the surface. So Douglas Hyde, of course, who became the first president of Ireland, his seminal essay, which was called The Necessity for De-Anglicising Ireland, was first delivered in November 1892 to the Irish National Literary Society. And here's what he says. He said at the end, he says, "In conclusion, I would earnestly appeal to everyone, whether unionist or nationalist, who wishes to see the Irish nation produce its best. Surely, whatever our politics are, we all wish that. To set his face against this constant running to England for our books, literature, music, games, fashions, and ideas. I appeal to everyone, whatever his politics, for this is no political matter, to do his best to help the Irish race to develop in future upon Irish lines, even at the risk of encouraging national aspirations." Isn't that lovely? Even at the risk of encouraging national aspirations, because he didn't even dare to dream in the 1890s hardly. Because upon Irish lines alone can the Irish race once more become what it was of yore, one of the most original, artistic, literary and charming peoples of Europe. So this is what's in her background. She was born 30 years before Douglas Hyde made this speech. She was born in 1864 near Omagh in County Tyrone, and she was the first of 13 children born to a Methodist couple, Seton Milligan and Charlotte Burns. Her father was a successful salesman and the family was staunchly unionist. In 1875, he was promoted and they moved to Belfast, where Charlotte and her siblings were educated at Methodist College. Her father was clearly a very cultured man, and he was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society of Antiquaries of Ireland in 1888. So it's in the family, this interest in old things. He was also a founder member of the committee which launched the Ulster Journal of Archaeology in 1895. Her mother was an accomplished musician, so she gets this love of old things from her father, and the music seems to come from her mother's side. Her mother was an accomplished musician, And 4 of the Milligan children, including Charlotte, went on to study music at European conservatories. Music became her vocation early in life, and she was heavily supported in that by her mother. According to her sister, Alice, at just the 11 years of age, she confided it to a friend that she knew so much about music that she could not possibly learn any more, that her musical education was now complete. This is at the age of 11. However, she did go on to study a little more. But since we've mentioned Alice, her sister, let's talk a little bit more about her, because she's actually quite a bit more famous than Charlotte. Alice was born 2 years after her older sister, and though Charlotte's politics apparently remained unionist throughout her life, Alice became an ardent Republican. She studied English literature and English history at King's College London, and on her return to Belfast she trained as a teacher and taught Latin in schools in Derry and Belfast. And she reflected that during the years of her Anglo-centric education she learned nothing of Ireland. That would have been the normal thing. From the 1890s, she promoted the Irish language in accessible ways. So one approach she used, for example, was to adapt magic lantern shows in which images were projected onto a wall in front of an audience and described by a speaker, and incorporate them into her work as a Gaelic League teacher. So these are amazing women in the family. They're thinking of all sorts of ways to promote the culture. And as I say, this sister becomes this sort of rabid Republican. So she does all sorts of things. One of the most important weapons in the arsenal of the nationalists at that period was the fringe press. So you had the Workers' Republic, and the editor, of course, was James Connolly. You had Unclive Solace, which was edited by Pádraig Pearse. And Alice Milligan was heavily involved in printed culture herself. So she founded, in Belfast, she founded the Sean Van Vocht. So that's a sort of anglicised spelling. And Sean Van Vocht is the poor Irish woman, the poor old Irish woman, and Sean Van Vocht. And this, of course, is an image of Ireland. Ireland is the Sean Van Vocht, the poor old woman. And she published prolifically in the press throughout her life. So her first volume, here she is when she's a little older. Her first volume of poetry, Hero Lays, from 1908, was a collection of poems that she published over her years in Irish newspapers and journals. She had a key role in the development of the National Theatre in Ireland. As early as 1900, her play, The Last Feast of the Fianna, was staged by the Irish Literary Theatre, and in 1901 she worked with Maud Gonne and the Fay brothers to stage 2 major productions in Dublin. She was also a political and a community activist. She helped to organise the 1898 centenary celebrations of the 1798 rebellion. And in 1916, after the Easter Rising, she travelled to London to attend the trial of Roger Casement, who of course was going to be executed. So she spent much of that year visiting political prisoners, and after partition, when again living in Northern Ireland, she helped found the Anti-Partition Union. So she's always fighting the fight all the way along. And if we have a look at her when she's older, in the 1940s she was active in international causes such as the Campaign for Indian Famine Relief. So she's such an amazing, they're just amazing women. She died in April 1953 in County Tyrone, just a couple of miles from where she was born. She played a pivotal role in Irish cultural, social and political life, and an obituary in 1953 recalls, "The radius of her friendship was an index of her quality. W.B. Yeats, Standish O'Grady, Arthur Griffith, John O'Leary, these are only a handful of the names which add up to a roll call of modern Irish history." So I wanted to read you one of her poems from Hero Lays from 1908, because this gives you maybe a taste of the background of Charlotte's childhood, since Alice and Charlotte shared a childhood. So this is her poem, When I Was a Little Girl. When I was a little girl in the garden playing, a thing was often said to chide us delaying. When after sunny hours at twilight's falling, down through the garden walks came our old nurse calling, "Come in, for it's growing late and the grass will wet ye. Come in, or when it's dark, the fiends will get ye." Then at this dreadful news, all helter-skelter, the panic-struck little flock ran home for shelter. And round the nursery fire sat still to listen, 50 bare toes on the hearth, 10 eyes a-glisten. to hear of a night in March and loyal folk waiting to see a great army of men come devastating, an army of papists grim with a green flag over them, red coats and black police flying before them. But God, who our nurse declared guards British dominions, sent down a fall of snow and scattered the Fenians. But somewhere they're lurking yet, maybe they're near us. Four little hearts pit-a-pat thought, can they hear us? Then the wind-shaken pane sounded like drumming. Oh, they cried, tuck us in, the Fenians are coming. I think this is an amazing poem. It's to see inside a unionist mindset that the bogeyman is the Fenians, these awful Irish nationalists. So the Fenians are coming. Four little pairs of hands in the cots where she led them, over their frightened heads, pulled up the bedclothes. But one little rebel there, watching all with laughter, thought, when the Fenians come, I'll rise and go after. Wished she had been a boy and a good deal older, able to walk for miles with a gun on her shoulder, able to lift aloft the green flag over them, red coats and black police flying before them. And as she dropped asleep, was wondering whether God, if she prayed to him, would give fine weather. So this is our Alice. This is our Alice. She wants to be out there with a gun. She's not listening to them. But this is the idea that they had a nurse, they had a nursery. You can see this wonderful rich Anglo upbringing. And one of them is going to turn very, very native and go very, very far astray. There are several and much better known parallels to the Milligan sisters and this turning from their natural unionism of their families to this rampant republicanism. So there are much better parallels. The obvious parallel is Maud Gonne, who's the society girl from a Protestant ascendancy family, but who in fact turns out to be a feminist, a socialist, an ardent separatist, and admirer even of the physical force tradition of Irish republicanism. A woman who's about to take up a gun. 1898 saw the centenary of the 1798 rebellion, and Maud Gonne was active in the commemoration along with Alice Milligan. She was prominent in the formation of the National Theatre and acted in the Abbey Theatre, and founded the radical women's organisation Innian na hÉireann, the Daughters of Ireland. She's also famous, of course, for being the muse of W.B. Yeats, whom she rejected as a potential husband. Then you have the other society girl, Constance Gore Booth, who became Countess Markievicz. So she and her sister, Ava Gore Booth, like the Milligan sisters, they came from a Protestant, largely upper-class unionist background. But Constance worked tirelessly helping the poor of Dublin in the years before 1916. She became a commissioned officer in the Irish Citizens' Army and was involved in the planning of the 1916 Rising. And on the day, she fought in St. Stephen's Green, and she fought in the College of Surgeons, where she eventually surrendered. She was given the death sentence, but it was commuted to life imprisonment because she was a woman. Later, she became the first woman elected to Parliament in London. She's the very first woman elected to the English Parliament. And she's also the first woman to be elected to the Irish Parliament, Dáil Éireann. So she was elected the first minister in a modern democracy in 1919. The very first woman minister anywhere is Constance Gore Booth, Countess Markievicz. So here she is, when she goes from these beautiful dresses and this gorgeous upbringing to this. So back to Charlotte. After Charlotte finished school, she studied music and piano at the Conservatory in Frankfurt. She spent a year at the Royal College of Music in London, and she finished off her studies at the Conservatoire in Milan. She met a young solicitor in London, Charles Elliott Fox, and they married in 1892, and they had one child, Seton Henry Elliott Fox, who's born in 1893. She composed her first songs because she had this immense musical training. She's been to conservatoires all over Europe, so she composes music. She composes her first songs in 1898 using texts by late 19th century nationalistic poets and writers such as her own sister, her sister Alice's friend, and a fellow activist called Ethna Carberry. Irish dramatists such as William Boyle and the Anglo-Irish Alfred Percival Graves, who was president, as we've heard, of the Irish Literary Society in London. She also collaborated on songs with the Irish nationalist and writer George Russell, A.E. He was known as A.E. So these were published from 1898 onwards in London by the music publishers Boozies and by Chappell. So she was a published composer. She also set lyrics by James Joyce, for example, 4 Joyce songs, which are published in 1909. There's at least one instance of Charlotte composing both the poetry and the music. So her Spring's Ecstasy song was published by Boosey's in 1904. Her sister Alice, of course, was composing lyrics, and these were set to music by Charlotte from about 1905 onwards. Previously, in 1904, another sister, Edith, who became Edith Wheeler, is her married name, was writing lyrics to fit with traditional melodies which were collected by Charlotte. So Charlotte collected airs and she arranged them for piano and voice with English words composed to fit them. And both her sisters, Alice Milligan and Edith Wheeler, contributed to this part of her output. And I wonder how many of you know a song called The Singing Bird. Hang on a second. 8. Where are we? Who knows this song? I've seen the lark soar high at morn to sing up in the blue. I've heard the blackbird pipe his song, the thrush and linnet too. But none of them can sing so sweet, my singing bird, as you. Ah, none of them can sing so sweet, my singing bird, as you. Now, I grew up singing that song. I always loved it. And I always sort of thought maybe it was a 19th century ballad or something. And it's really funny because, just as an aside, in my beginners teaching materials that I've used over the years with students, I've often used my singing bird because it sits well on the fingers, but I always felt kind of vaguely embarrassed about using it. Well, it's not really an early Irish harp piece. It's nothing to do with our music. It's probably a 19th century ballad, I imagined from looking at the words. And so I was tracking it down recently, or maybe a year ago, and I saw Edith Wheeler compose the words, and I thought, well, I should really check out who Edith Wheeler is. And of course, one thing led to another. Turned out it was Edith Milligan, who became Edith Wheeler. I went, oh, for heaven's sake, this is Charlotte Milligan Fox's sister. So I just find it really amusing that this is the one non-Irish or non-early Irish harp piece that I've ever used, and in fact, it's a complete and total connection with our world. So. Let's see, where were we? We were there with Constance Gore booze. Wait a minute, I have to open it up so I could. There we go, that way. The Folk Song Society was formed in London in 1898. Just the Folk Song Society, it wasn't called the English Folk Song Society or anything, under the auspices of the Irish Literary Society, though. So Milligan Fox was an early member, and according to its president, A.P. Graves, who wrote an article about her after her death, she spared nothing for it, as we heard: time, money, health, and life itself. Now, Sarah Lanier, who's brought out in 2013, just been reissued, a new version of Charlotte Milligan Fox's Annals, and she has a very good introduction. She points out that Milligan Fox's first published article, Irish Music in London, for the inaugural edition of the All-Ireland Review in 1900, described how the Folk Song Society was making Irish music accessible in London. But by 1903, the Folk Song Society's work had faltered through the illness of a pivotal member, the Honorary Secretary, Kate Lee. You need your Honorary Secretary to stay in good shape, isn't that right, Simon? For any society to prosper, the Honorary Secretary has to be... Anyway, their poor Honorary Secretary got sick, Kate Lee. So Milligan Fox and A.P. Graves were frustrated by this, and they branched out amicably to found, with other Irish members of the Folk Song Society, the Irish Folk Song Society. This led the way for other specialist splinter groups for Welsh music, and under the auspices of Marjorie Kennedy Fraser for Scottish music. So Milligan Fox was appointed Honorary Secretary of the new society, a role she held until her early death in 1916 at the age of 52. So early members of the society included Anglo-Irish composer Charles Villiers Stanford, his student Charles Wood from Armagh, who was the teacher of Vaughan Williams, the Irish musicologist and historian from County Waterford Henry Grattan Flood, and the Irish antiquarian and song collector P.W. Joyce. Milligan Fox co-edited the Journal of the Irish Folk Song Society with the Anglo-Irish composer Herbert Hughes from Belfast, who had studied at the Royal College of Music with Stanford and Wood, and the first volume was issued in 1904. Her own musicological and literary articles were mainly published in the journal from Volume 1 in 1904 to Volume 15 in 1915. As well as being an editor of the journal, Milligan Fox contributed many articles over the years on subjects such as individual Irish songs. So in 1905 she publishes Ballad, Moorlock Mary, Air, Catherine Og. Articles on songs from particular areas. So in 1910 in Volume 8 she publishes Airs Taken Down in County Tyrone. She publishes articles on music collections. So in Volume 10 she has an article called Concerning the William Elliott Hudson Collection of Irish Folk Songs. And in Volume 15 she reviews parallel music endeavours. So she has a review of Mélodies et chansons françaises recueillies et harmonisées par Lucien de Flany. So this is a woman who's just familiar with all sorts of things, capable of reviewing all sorts of music. She had her Songs of the Irish Harpers collected and arranged for harper piano, published in Dublin, London and Glasgow and New York in 1910. And in it she publishes her arrangements of some of Edward Bunting's unpublished tunes with newly composed English lyrics. And she tries to give information on their provenance as well. So here she has a tune called A Villagrana, Villagrana, My Thousand Times Beloved, and she says, this air with the Gaelic words was found in the pocket book of Edward Bunting. He collected it from the singing of a Mrs. O'Connor in Galway in 1798. In the English version, Miss Alice Milligan makes of it a harper's love song. It's all very romantic. So this is the kind of thing she's publishing. English words and piano arrangements of the period with big arpeggiated chords and lots of harmony. But wonderfully, she gives not just the English words, but she gives words in Irish as well. So she's trying hard. It's very rare that you see Irish and English words. Usually, well, you never see Irish words anywhere, but usually you just see English words. So I think it's a loose translation into Irish rather than original Irish words. Or is it, wait a minute, or is it an Irish song with a loosely English translation? Oh no, it looks like it's an original Irish song and it's a loose translation into English. So here she includes some of her own compositions. So Sorrow of Sorrows, a Connacht love song, I think is actually her own song. Because she says this song was composed by the editor in imitation of the old Irish school, after a long and prolonged study of the method of Irish composition and the formation of the Irish scale. The words have also been inspired by the study of Gaelic poetry and written by Miss Alice Milligan. So this is one of her own compositions. Again, with a chordal piano accompaniment. With little sort of pianistic interludes as well. She takes tunes from sources other than Bunting, for example, Petrie as well. Her most important work, The Annals of the Irish Harpers, was published by John Murray in London in 1911. And that same year, Sarah Lanier tells us in her reissuing of it, that she went on a tour of North America to increase awareness of Irish traditional music. So in February of that year, she successfully established a New York branch of the Irish Folk Song Society. It truly is indefatigable. It's amazing. London, Belfast, New York, everywhere. Just before St. Patrick's Day, short plays written by her, so she's writing plays on the side as well, and also by Alice, were performed at the National Theatre in Washington, D.C. So Milligan Fox's one-act romantic play was called The Bardic Recital, and it told, unsurprisingly, the story of a wandering Irish bard and an Irish harper in 11th century Ireland. At the end of that month, she gave a lecture, Songs by the Fireside, illustrated with Irish songs in New York. And in April, she travelled to Boston to check out Irish music manuscripts in the possession of Harvard University. And it's really wonderful that she went to Boston because she didn't find anything novel there, but she went to Boston Public Library and she came across the Hudson, the Henry Hudson manuscripts. This is an absolute treasure trove of hundreds and hundreds of tunes collected from pipers and other people by Henry Hudson. And nobody really knew where those manuscripts were, and she found them in the Boston Public Library. So this gave her material for dissemination through the Journal of the Irish Folk Song Society. Now we'll be mentioning Henry Hudson's manuscripts again in Ronan Brown's talk on regulators and accompaniment styles in uilleann piping, to see how we can relate early 19th century uilleann pipe styles to harping, if there are any potential links. And so we'll be looking at some of the pieces that Henry Hudson collected from Paddy Keneally, the piper. So they were in those manuscripts that she found in Boston. So obviously the reason, well, one of the many reasons we love her, is that she published the Annals of the Irish Harpers. So what's in this book? Who knows this book and who can tell us what's in it? What's in the Annals? Yes?
The memoirs.
The memoirs of Arthur O'Neill. So, but why? Well, whose papers is she? What's she publishing?
She's Bunting.
So she finds Bunting. Yeah, we'll get to the story of how she finds Bunting's papers. But she finds his papers, and so she can publish, for example, the memoirs of Arthur O'Neill, whom we're commemorating this year, in her volume. What else does she publish in this book?
Letters from.
Letters Letters from MacDonald to Bunting. All sorts of correspondence that was in Bunting's paper. That's really interesting to see. What else? So she tells us everything she knows about Bunting. She tells us all about the Harpers meeting in Belfast. She tells us how she finds the manuscripts, the memoirs of Arthur O'Neill, and
Does she mention about hunting for our harp?
Yeah, so she has a whole chapter on the last Harper. So she's talking. She has lots of information on everything that's relevant to us: the Belfast Harp meeting, the Harpers, the correspondence, Bunting's endeavours, all sorts of things. So it's a complete treasure trove of a book, which she publishes in 1911. In 1912, she went on a field collecting trip with Alice and Edith. She went to Waterford with an Edison phonograph. Oh, sorry, this should be opening it better. Oh, no, that's the best we can do. So she goes with her phonograph and she starts to record things, because it's the 20th century. You can do this sort of thing now. And she has phonograph and cylinders to record the music. But her health started to fail in 1913. Have another photo of her. So her health starts to fail, alas, in 1913. There's quite a bit of tragedy in her family, because her mother dies, she dies, and her father dies, all in close succession. She dies on the 25th of March 1916 at the age of 52 only. Her mother predeceased her in January, so just 2 months earlier, and her father died 1 month later in April, so there were 3 family funerals in the space of 12 weeks. She's buried in a family plot in Omagh. The 1916 Rising took place in Dublin on Monday, April 24th, just 1 month after her death. And after Charlotte's death, Lanier tells us that Alice offered her papers to the Library of Queen's University in Belfast. Alice spent June and July sorting them out, and Edith lodged them at the university in 1917. And aren't we lucky? So there were 45 items: Bunting's manuscripts and notebooks, his letters, the diary of Patrick Lynch, and a manuscript copy of the memoirs of the Harper Arthur O'Neill. So to finish off, I want to read you in Charlotte's own words the story of how she found the papers of Edward Bunting, for those of you who don't know it already. So in the preface in the Annals, she says, "When in course of time I became Honorary Secretary of the Irish Folk Song Society, founded in 1904, Mr. Young contributed to our journal an article on Bunting and his work, which awakened great interest. Meantime, through the medium of the Fesceol and the Gaelic revival in Ireland, renewed attention was directed to the harp. Belfast was not behindhand. The instrument again became popular on concert platforms, and indeed, occasionally, a picturesque band of harps graced the orchestra of the Ulster Hall. In consequence, a friend wrote me asking me to select a harp for her daughter at one of the leading London warehouses. And this is Morley's at South Kensington. I went there, and having selected an instrument, was about to leave when it came into my head to ask. And you think, why did she ask this question? It's such an incredible question. She says, do any old wandering harpers ever come in here to buy strings? What sort of question is this to ask? You're in South Kensington, in a very fancy pedal harp shop. It's Morley's in South Ken. Do any wandering harpers ever come in here to buy strings? See, this is why I love this woman. She just asks these she's off-the-wall questions. You know, I wouldn't dare. We'd go in and think, I wonder if what we wouldn't say. She says, the attendant smiled somewhat cynically, really. And I felt that my question had been a foolish one, so she realised it's a silly thing to ask. For the days of the last minstrels are surely over. Well, no, he said, we have no such customers. But by the way, a gentleman was in here not long ago who would interest you. He bought a harp, and when giving the order, he said, it's only right that I should have a harp in my house, for it was my grandfather who preserved the music of the ancient Irish Harpers. I mean, what are the chances? Seriously, what are the chances? Eagerly, I asked for this really gives me hairs on the back of my neck, because it was all this silly question, and the fact that somebody had gone in just before you, and he remembered, the man went, oh, it's funny you should say that. I mean, how tenuous are these things? Eagerly, I asked for the name and address of this purchaser, who turned out to be Dr. Louis McCrory of Battersea, so just across the bridge. A brief correspondence resulted in his inviting me to his home to inspect certain papers belonging to his grandfather, who was no other than Edward Bunting. On my arrival at the doctor's house, he met me with the abrupt remark, now, I hope you're an Irishwoman, for I think someone from Ireland should handle my grandfather's papers. When I said that I came from Belfast, his countenance cleared, for had not Bunting's labours from first to last been connected with it, and he seemed satisfied that he had found a fit and proper person to go over the old manuscripts. At this time, I hoped for nothing more than some gleanings of unpublished airs and some personal memoirs and letters for the Irish Folk Song Journal. But as I went through the mass of documents which Dr. McCrory put before me, I saw that a great amount of unpublished material had survived. Here were musical notebooks, letters, faded documents which demanded most careful consideration. I grew more and more absorbed in the study of them, and in the end the doctor decided that I must take the box away with me and investigate them at leisure. Then he added to my delight by telling me that there were other papers in a box in Dublin and that he would try to obtain them for me. He explained that Edward Bunting had two daughters, Mary Ann and Sarah. The latter, who married Mr. R. McCrory of Belfast, was his own mother. Mary Ann Bunting, who married Mr. James Wright in Dublin, had a daughter, Florence. This lady is the wife of an eminent Dublin architect, Thomas Manley Dean, son of Sir Thomas Newnham Dean. Certain of the Bunting manuscripts were in her possession. On the occasion of my next visit to Ireland, I went armed with an introduction from Dr. McCrory and interviewed Mrs. Dean, with the satisfactory result that another box of Bunting manuscripts was confided to me. I'll cut forward. She says later, the investigation of all this mass of papers occupied me pleasantly for many months. In the notebooks, I found many beautiful airs which Bunting had never published, and which I drew on for the Irish Folk Song Journal. Some I arranged and published as songs of the Irish Harpers, with words in English and Irish. However, as I pored over the manuscripts, I felt that there was material here for a book. The manuscript Life of Arthur O'Neill, the harper, deserved to be published in full, though Bunting, with the assistance of Samuel Ferguson, had used many anecdotes from it in the preface to his last collection. The Journal of Patrick Lynch had never seen the light, and Dr. MacDonald's letters were of great interest. Above all, I felt that a memoir of Bunting was called for, and so embarked upon the task of authorship. From first to last, I have relied much on the help of my sister, Miss Alice Milligan, who has had considerable literary experience and a knowledge of Irish history. There we have it, the Annals. Thank you very much. We have, I think, 2 copies of the Annals in the library. It's one of the most fascinating books you could read if you're interested in what we're interested in here this week. And we also have, as I say, this reprint, which has now appeared, which you can buy. I have something like 10 or 12 copies that Sarah Lanier, Roland Spottiswoode, gave me a few weeks ago because I knew we might need them for the summer school. So I have a box of these, and Simon has them in his emporium. So I think there's something like €20. So get your copy while you're here. For a mild €20, you can have it all and bring it all home with you and read it to your heart's content. Okay.
There's also a first edition in
And there is a first edition in Newport as well. Okay. So for the well-heeled among us, or those who truly must have first editions, you know, sell your firstborn, buy the first edition. For the rest of us, this will do fine.